My name is Walter Hayes, and this is the story of how my own son told me not to come for Christmas, and how I made sure he never forgot that choice. Sit back and let me tell you how a single sentence at the wrong time can change a family forever. Before we get too far, don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. I love hearing from folks all over the world. I had always believed Christmas was the one time of year when family came before everything else. You could be busy, you could be tired, you could even be mad. But when the tree was lit and the table was set, you came home. That's how I was raised, and that's how I raised my kids. At least, I thought I did. It was the first week of December when I called my son Greg to confirm what I'd been looking forward to all year. My wife, Linda, and I had already picked out gifts for the grandkids, wrapped them in shiny paper, and planned the 6-hour drive. Linda had been baking for days, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg. But when Greg picked up the phone, his voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "Dad, maybe don't come this year." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Don't come? What are you talking about? We've been coming every year since." "It's just, things are a little tight, and the kids are busy. We might just do something small here. Just us. Just us." It took me a second to realize what he meant. "So, you don't want us there?" There was a pause. "It's not that. It's just not a good time." I felt something in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but that sharp sting you get when someone you love makes you feel small. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "All right, if that's what you want." Linda was in the kitchen when I hung up. She looked at me, waiting for me to tell her the plan. I told her exactly what Greg had said. Her shoulders slumped, but she didn't say a word. That night, I sat in my chair, staring at the little envelope on the counter. Inside was the check for Greg's monthly mortgage payment, something I'd been covering for almost 3 years. He'd hit a rough patch after a business deal went bad, and I'd stepped in, telling him it was temporary. Temporary had turned into permanent. And now, well, if my presence at Christmas wasn't worth the trouble, maybe my money wasn't either. I didn't rush to any decision that night. That's not how I was raised, and it's not how I've lived my life. My father used to tell me, "You can't undo what you've done in anger, son." So instead, I sat there in my recliner, listening to the quiet hum of the heater, watching the Christmas lights blink in the window. Linda kept her thoughts to herself, but I could feel her watching me from the other room. After 42 years of marriage, she didn't need to ask me what I was thinking. She already knew. The next morning, I pulled out the folder where I kept all of Greg's mortgage paperwork. I'd been the one to co-sign, the one to deal with the bank, the one to keep the payments on time. It had been my way of helping him rebuild without him losing his house. I didn't regret it, not then, but that check on the counter suddenly looked different. It wasn't just a payment, it was a lifeline. And apparently, my son thought that lifeline came with no strings attached. I slipped the check back into the folder and set it on my desk. I didn't say anything to Linda. There was no rush. Over the next week, I kept myself busy. I went to the hardware store to pick up a few things I didn't really need. I shoveled the walk, even though it barely snowed. I stopped in at the diner for coffee, talking to old friends about the weather and the local high school basketball team. I smiled when people asked if I was ready for Christmas, and I told them we were taking it easy this year. Inside, though, I was thinking. I thought about the Christmas mornings when Greg was little, how he'd run down the hallway, hair sticking up, eyes wide as he saw the presents under the tree. I thought about the year I worked double shifts just to afford the bike he wanted. I thought about the times I went without so my kids wouldn't have to. And then I thought about the tone in his voice on that phone call, that careful, dismissive tone, like he was doing me a favor by letting me down easy. On December 15th, I drove to the bank. The teller, a young man named Kevin, who'd known me for years, smiled when he saw me. "Morning, Mr. Hayes. In for your usual deposit?" "Not today," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. "Today I need to make a change." He looked at the folder I placed in front of him. "What kind of change?" "I'd like to stop an automatic payment," I said. Kevin's smile faded a little. Which one? The mortgage payment for 421 Maple Street, I said plainly. He typed something into his computer. That's your son's property, right? That's right, I said. Kevin hesitated, but he knew better than to ask questions. All right. We can cancel the payment schedule today. You'll need to sign here. I took the pen, my hand steady. Once the form was signed, Kevin gave me a polite nod. It's done. I walked out into the cold air, the sun low in the winter sky, and felt a strange calm settle over me. That evening, Linda asked what I'd been up to. I told her the truth, and she didn't argue. She just sat there, nodding slowly, her hands wrapped around her mug of tea. We didn't decorate much after that. The tree stayed up, but the gifts we'd bought for the grandkids stayed in the closet. On Christmas morning, Linda and I had a quiet breakfast. We didn't call Greg. He didn't call us. The days rolled into January, then February. On February 5th, my phone rang. It was Greg. Dad, he said, his voice tight, the bank called me. They said my mortgage payment bounced. It didn't bounce, I said calmly. It just wasn't paid. There was a pause on the line. What do you mean it wasn't paid? You've been covering it for years. I have, I said, until Christmas. Silence. Then, you can't just stop paying without telling me. I can, I said, and I did. He started to raise his voice. Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts me in? They're already charging late fees. Greg, I said, cutting him off, I'm not going to argue with you. You made it clear I wasn't welcome in your home for Christmas. That was your choice. This is mine. He hung up. A week later, I got a letter from the bank addressed to both of us. Greg was 2 months behind. If he didn't catch up by March, foreclosure proceedings would begin. Linda asked me if I was going to step in. I told her no. March came. Greg called again, this time sounding more desperate. He asked if we could at least talk about it. I told him there was nothing to talk about. That's when he said something that made my decision final. You're ruining my life, Dad. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling the words settle like lead in my stomach. Greg, I said, you did that yourself. If you think this is where it ends, you're not even close. By April, the foreclosure notice was official. Greg tried everything, borrowing from friends, maxing out credit cards, but it wasn't enough. The bank scheduled an auction for June. And that's when I made my move. I called an old friend of mine, Bill, who'd worked in real estate for decades. I told him I was looking for a property, 421 Maple Street. I didn't tell him why. He didn't ask. When the auction day came, I was there in the back of the room, wearing my old brown jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. Greg didn't see me. He was too busy pacing at the front, watching strangers raise their paddles. The bidding started low, but the room was quiet. It wasn't a great market, and most people knew the house needed work. When the price hit the bottom range I'd been waiting for, I raised my hand. Greg's head snapped around. Our eyes met. I kept my hand up. Another bidder tried to push the price higher, but I stayed with it. In the end, my bid stood. The auctioneer slammed the gavel. Sold. I walked out with the deed in my name. Greg stood on the sidewalk, his face pale. You bought my house. No, I said, slipping the keys into my pocket. I bought my house back. I turned and walked away. And that's how one Christmas phone call turned into the quietest, most satisfying revenge of my life. Greg didn't say anything else that day. He just stood there on the sidewalk, staring after me as I walked to my truck. I didn't turn back. There was nothing left to say. The drive home was quiet. Linda didn't ask me how it went. She could read the truth in my face. I poured myself a coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in months, I felt light. But the story wasn't done. Buying the house was only part of it. I had spent years watching Greg take for granted the things other people would kill for. A roof over his head, a family that supported him, a chance to start over. He treated them like furniture in a guest room, useful when convenient, invisible the rest of the time. I wasn't going to hand him his old life back. Not now. Instead, I called my friend Bill again. I've got the deed, I told him. Now I need to figure out what to do with it. He chuckled. You planning to flip it? No, I said. I'm planning to make sure the next time Greg sees it, it's a reminder of what he lost. Bill whistled low. Cold. Not cold, I said. Measured. Over the next few weeks, I had contractors come in to fix the place up. New paint, fresh siding, the roof patched where it had leaked. Nothing flashy. Just clean, solid, cared for. Greg must have driven by at some point because one afternoon I got a text from him. So you're fixing it up? Planning to rent it out? I didn't reply. That silence seemed to bother him more than anything I could have said. By August, the work was done. The house looked better than it had in years. The lawn was green, the porch newly stained, and the windows gleamed. I put up a small sign in the front yard, Community Resource Center, coming soon. It wasn't a bluff. Linda and I had been talking for years about giving back to the neighborhood, a place where kids could study after school, where older folks could gather, where nobody would be told they weren't expected anymore. Greg heard about it 2 days later. He called, his voice sharp. You're turning my house into a hangout for strangers? I almost laughed. It's not your house, Greg, and it's not a hangout. It's a place for people who actually care about being here. He swore under his breath. You're unbelievable. Funny, I said. That's exactly what I thought last Christmas. He hung up again. The opening day of the center was in early September. Neighbors came by with pies, folding chairs, and coffee urns. Kids ran through the yard, chasing each other while parents stood talking on the porch. I watched it all from the front steps, feeling something settle inside me. That's when Greg showed up. He parked across the street, stayed in his car for a minute, then walked up slowly. His eyes moved over the new paint, the flowers in the front beds, the laughter spilling out of the open windows. You really went through with it, he said. I told you I would, I replied. Why? His voice cracked. Just a little. I didn't answer right away. I looked past him at the street, at the faces of the people who'd shown up, at the way the place already felt alive. Because some things, I said finally, are worth more than a mortgage payment. Greg stood there for a few seconds more, then turned and walked back to his car. I didn't watch him drive away. That night, after everyone had gone home, Linda and I sat on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. The air was cool, the sky clear. You think he'll ever understand, she asked. Maybe, I said, or maybe he won't. Either way, I'll sleep fine. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the crickets. For the first time since that Christmas call, I felt the deep, quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd taken my life back, and this time, no one could take it away. If you think that's the end, you'd be wrong. 2 weeks after the opening, the center had a rhythm. Mondays were homework help. Wednesdays were resume night. Fridays, Miss June taught the kids to bake banana bread that made the whole place smell like home. People started calling me Mr. G. I pretended not to like it. Linda knew better. One afternoon, I was fixing a wobbly table when a shadow fell across the doorway. Greg. He looked thinner, like the worry had done the work of a diet no plan could. Can we talk? He asked. We're open, I said. Talk fast. He glanced at the kids, at the bulletin board covered with job postings and school photos, at the paper sign that said free coat swap, take one, leave one. Dad, I need help. I set down the screwdriver and waited. They moved my things into storage, he said. Isabella's parents they've got opinions. About me, about you, about everything. I didn't feed the silence. I let it sit there until he filled it. I've been sleeping at a friend's place, he said. I'm applying for work. The mortgage. Well, it's not my problem anymore, is it? But I keep thinking of that living room, of last Christmas, of... He stopped. Then the words came out in a plain, tired voice. I was wrong. A dozen responses flashed through my head. I kept the only one that mattered. What do you want, Greg? His eyes were red, from lack of sleep or from the truth finally rubbing raw. I want a do-over. I nodded once. "We don't do those here." A kid called out from the kitchen. "Mr. G, where's the mixing bowl?" "In the drawer by the stove," I answered, then turned back to Greg. "We do work here. If you want to start, I'll give you one, but it won't look like what you're used to." He waited. "You'll help at the center," I said. "Chairs, trash, paint, tutoring, whatever is needed. You'll be here on time. You'll learn names. You'll say, 'Please' and 'Thank you.' And when folks ask who you are, you'll say, 'I'm Greg. I'm learning.'" He swallowed. "Is that it?" "No," I said. "On the first Friday of every month, we pass a coffee can. I never asked for a dime from you, but you'll put in something. $5, 10, whatever you can. Not to me, to the can, to the place you tried to laugh off as a hangout for strangers." Greg stared at the floor for a long second, then looked up. "Okay." "Start now," I said, and handed him a broom. He swept like the floor had insulted him, but he did it. Then he stacked chairs, carried boxes, and, when Miss June asked for a hand, cracked eggs with the focus of a surgeon. By closing time, he smelled like flour and pine sol. He looked younger. "How much for a slice?" he asked Miss June, lifting the corner of a cooling rack. "First time's free," she said, and pressed 2 pieces into his palm. "Share." He crossed the room and held one out to me. We ate in the doorway. It wasn't peace, but it wasn't war. "Same time tomorrow?" I asked. He nodded. Days turned into a week, then 2. Greg showed up early. He left late. The kids figured out he could fix anything that squeaked or stuck. One boy, Trey, wouldn't leave his side. "Teach me how to use the drill," Trey said. "First we learn how not to," Greg told him, and lined up scrap wood and safety glasses. I watched from the hall, then went back to my ledger. Donations in the coffee can were still small, but they were steady. Names I didn't know drop folded bills and quarters with the care you give to something you want to keep alive. On a rainy Tuesday, Isabella came. She didn't step inside. She stood under a black umbrella and looked at the front sign like it had personally insulted her. Her coat was perfect, her posture straighter than a yardstick. Greg saw her first. He stiffened, then he wiped his hands and walked outside. I stayed by the window, far enough to give them privacy, close enough to stop any foolishness. They spoke low. She gestured toward the house, toward me, toward the street. Greg didn't move. Finally, Isabella's mouth twisted into the kind of smile that never touches the eyes. She said something short, turned, and left. Greg came back in, jaw set. "You okay?" I asked. "I will be," he said. Then he grabbed the dustpan and went right back to work. 2 nights later, Greg rang our doorbell. Linda beat me to it, opening the door with a towel over her shoulder and a wooden spoon in one hand. "Smells like chili," Greg said, trying to smile. Linda looked him over like a nurse who knows the difference between fine and not fine. "Wash up," she said. "Bowls are on the counter." He ate with a hunger I recognized from a different time in his life, when we were counting pennies, not pretending we had them. After dinner, he helped dry dishes without being asked. Linda handed him a bag before he left, a clean blanket, 2 pairs of socks, and a note I didn't read. When the door closed, I said, "You're a softie." "Always have been," she said. "Don't start acting surprised now." The next big push at the center was Picture Day. A volunteer photographer offered free family photos, simple backdrops, printed on the spot. You would have thought we were giving away gold. Greg ran cables, taped cords to the floor, and stood behind the light stand like a proper assistant. At noon, a boy in a red hoodie refused to smile. Greg knelt to his level. "Okay," he said. "No smile, but can we do serious like a superhero?" He showed the boy how to stand wide, chin up. The camera clicked. The boy looked at the print and laughed. Not a big laugh, just the kind that starts something good. "Nice work," the photographer told Greg. "Beginner's luck," Greg said, but his ears went pink. At the end of the day, I pulled out the coffee can. "Announcements," I said. "We need a new printer. Ours is on its last leg. If you can give, give. If you can't, take a cookie and a flyer and tell someone who can." Bills fluttered down like leaves. Then, from the back, Greg came forward and put in an envelope. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The can made a heavy sound when it hit the bottom. After we closed, I locked the door and turned to him. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. We stood there, the room smelling like fresh paper and cookies, the tables pushed back to the walls. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Dad," he said. "I told Trey I'd help him with his science project on Saturday. Come early, okay?" I blinked. He meant me, not the kid. "Yeah," I said. "I'll be here." He nodded once and headed to the back to grab his jacket. He didn't see me look at the coffee can again. Saturday felt like a holiday. Kids hauled in foam boards and nervous energy. Parents hovered. Greg sketched a plan on scrap paper and set up a project station. Glue guns on one side, markers on the other, snacks in the middle. Adults circling like friendly satellites. By noon, Trey's model of the solar system was drying on the table. He beamed. "Looks good," Greg said. "You did the work." Trey shook his head. "We did." Greg's jaw worked. His eyes got that glassy look men get when they're trying not to let everything that hurts leak out at once. He ruffled Trey's hair and walked to the hall. I followed. He leaned against the wall, took a breath, and let it out slow. "You built a place," he said, "where I can be useful." "You always could be," I said. "You just forgot." He nodded. "Yeah, a beat. I want to fix more than tables." "Then keep showing up," I said, "and listen more than you talk. That'll fix a lot." He gave a tired smile. "You've been waiting years to say that." "Maybe," I admitted. 3 months after the center opened, we had our first community dinner. Long tables, crockpots, paper plates, and the clatter that sounds like belonging. We pushed the chairs close and told folks to squeeze in. If there's room for one more plate, there's room for one more person. That was the rule. Halfway through, Greg tapped his glass. The room went quiet. "I owe you all something," he said. "An apology." My chest tightened. He didn't look at me. He looked at the people. The kids, the parents, Miss June, the retired history teacher who ran chess club. "I treated this street like it was a hallway I had to walk down to get to my real life," he said. "I forgot my father taught me every good thing I know with his hands and his time. I forgot my mother taught me that love is loud in kitchens and quiet in hospitals. I forgot what matters." He swallowed. "I'm sorry. I'm learning." No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. A few heads nodded. That was better. After dinner, people stayed to help. Greg went table to table, lifting, wiping, thanking. No speeches, just work. When the room was empty, I set the coffee can on the counter and reached for the lid. Greg's hand beat me there. "Mind if I do it?" he asked. I stepped back. He counted with care, not like a man chasing a total, but like someone honoring the shape of each gift. He wrote the number on a sticky note and left it on the inside of the lid, the way I do. "You taught me that," he said. "I know," I said. "I was there." We both laughed, and it didn't hurt. Then December came back around. Lights went up on porches. Stores played the same 5 songs. The air had that sharp smell that says, "Get your coat." Inside the center, we started a gift shelf. Books, puzzles, warm hats, all free. A sign above it said, "Take what you need. Leave what you can." A week before Christmas, a letter arrived at the center addressed to me. No return address. I opened it at my desk while Greg and Trey fixed a sticky closet door. Inside was a single check. A large one. The memo line said, "For the printer and the rest." The signature was a sharp, careful name I knew too well. Catherine Jenkins. I didn't say anything. I walked to the doorway and watched Greg slide the closet door, test it, slide it again. He caught me staring. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Not a secret, just not for right now. That night I told Linda. She raised an eyebrow. "Strings?" "None I can see." "Then cash it," she said. "Let the money do something honest for once." So I did. We bought the new printer. We stocked the gift shelf until it bowed. We added a second tutoring night. I wrote a thank you note with no flowery words, just facts. Your gift helped people. I mailed it to an address I found on a public listing. No return address on ours either. Christmas Eve at the center felt like a movie. Paper snowflakes, hot chocolate. Kids running around with that soft joy that tastes like sugar and sounds like bells. We kept it simple. Carols, a quiet circle, a wishboard where anyone could write what they hoped for in the new year. Greg stood at the edge, hands in his pockets. He didn't write anything on the board. He just read the notes. I want Dad to get a job. I want my mom to laugh again. I want a dog. I want to pass math. I want to be brave. When the last family left, he stayed to stack chairs. I wiped the counters. We worked in a silence that had weight and comfort. Dad, he said after a while. Yeah? Thank you for not letting me off easy. I rested the dish towel on the counter. Thank you for not running when I didn't. He nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the coffee can the way folks do when they're shy about giving. What's this? I asked. Back pay, he said. Not all of it, not even close, but it's part of what I owe the life I took for granted. I didn't open it. I put my hand over his for a second. This place will know what to do with it. He breathed out, a long, shaky breath that sounded like a man setting down a heavy box. Christmas morning, I woke to a quiet house. Snow fell in a slow curtain. Linda handed me a mug and a small box. What's this? I asked. Open it. Inside was a brass plaque. Gregory House, it read, with smaller letters under it. A place for second chances. I looked at Linda. You like it? I love it, I said, and pulled her close. We drove to the center after breakfast. The street was empty, the sky low and white. Greg was already there, sweeping the steps like we had a line out the door. Couldn't sleep, he said. I've got something, I told him and showed him the plaque. He stared at it. No, Dad. It should be the community's name, or Mom's, or... It's all of that, I said. Names are just doorways. This one fits. He didn't argue. He just held the screws while I drilled the holes. We set the plaque by the front door. He brushed his thumb over the letters, once, like checking they were real. Snow drifted down on the porch rails. Quiet stretched out, the good kind. He cleared his throat. Want to come by for dinner tonight? He asked. Just chili. I'm not ready for turkey, but I can try chili. I felt something warm and steady settle in my chest. Yeah, I said, I'd like that. He hesitated. Dad? If I mess up, and I will. You'll show up the next day, I said, and you'll sweep. That's how we fix things. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, his smile reached his eyes. If you've made it this far, stick with me. In the final segment, we lift the last veil, the newspaper, the check, and the moment the whole town learns why the house no longer answers to a bank. The payoff is worth it. I didn't call him after that day. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. Words can be like a dam. You break it, and everything floods out. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of hearing me angry. Instead, I let the silence work. Yad. Winter thickened, the kind that made your breath sting in the morning. The holidays were close now. Every shop window was full of gold ribbons and fake snow, the smell of cinnamon drifting from cafes. I saw families with arms full of wrapped gifts, couples laughing under strings of lights. I was alone in those crowds, but I didn't mind. Alone meant I could think. Alone meant I could plan. By the time Christmas Eve rolled around, I knew exactly what I was going to do. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was final. I called the bank first thing in the morning. My name was still on that mortgage, a detail my son had probably forgotten in his rush to get me out of his life. The payments were automated, tied directly to my account. One sentence to the clerk stopped everything. Cancel the payment authorization effective immediately. She hesitated. Sir, this will put the account into delinquency by the next due date. I almost smiled. Yes, I understand. If you think that's the end, you're not even close. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of whiskey, watching the snowfall. My phone lit up twice, once from an unknown number and once from my son's. I didn't answer either. 2 days later, a letter came. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen counter, letting it sit there like a reminder. By the time I did, the words inside were exactly what I expected. Formal language from the bank, warning of a missed payment, and possible foreclosure if the account wasn't brought current. I folded the letter neatly, put it back in the envelope, and slipped it into a drawer. The thing about power is, most people don't realize when they've lost it. Not until the ground under them starts to crack. I didn't hear from him again for almost a week. Not a text, not a call, not even one of those half-hearted, hope you're well messages people send when they want something but don't want to say it. Then, late on a Tuesday night, the phone rang. His name lit up on the screen. I let it buzz 3 times before I answered. Dad. His voice was different, no swagger, just a flat, thin sound. Did you do something to the bank payments? I took my time. Did you read the mortgage agreement before you signed it? There was a pause, the sound of him swallowing. I mean, yeah, but... Then you should already know the answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I could almost hear him running through the numbers in his head. He had a wife now, a lifestyle, a taste for things that didn't come cheap. He'd planned his little Christmas without me in the equation. Except I'd been part of the foundation the whole time. Pull that out and the whole thing tilts. January came, and with it, another letter from the bank. This one wasn't polite. Bold type, deadlines. Terms like immediate action required. I put it in the same drawer as the first. By the third letter, I knew the clock was almost out. That's when I booked my trip. Somewhere warm. Somewhere far. Somewhere that would make him understand just how small his little kingdom was. The day they came knocking, I wasn't even in the country. Snow still on the ground back home, but I was sitting on a terrace overlooking blue water, a cold drink sweating in my hand. They could pound on that locked door all they wanted. The neighbors would watch from behind curtains, whisper about how the bank was finally taking the house. And somewhere in the middle of that, he'd realize, this wasn't an accident. This was me, taking back the only thing I had left to take. If you think he learned his lesson there, you're about to see just how far I was willing to go. By February, the snow had turned to dirty slush back home, but the frost between us hadn't thawed a bit. He tried calling once more, this time from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, his tone had sharpened, the kind of voice a man uses when he's backed into a corner but still thinks he can bluff his way out. Dad, listen. We can fix this, but I need you to restart the payments. I let him talk, let him twist himself into a rope he'd end up hanging on. You said you didn't need me for Christmas, I finally said. I figured you didn't need me for the rest of the year either. That's not what It's exactly what you meant. Weeks passed. I kept my routine simple, mornings at the diner, afternoons walking by the harbor, evenings reading old letters from a time when family meant something. But every time I passed that stack of bank notices, I felt the weight of my decision. Not guilt. No, I'd burned through that long ago, but the steady hum of anticipation. Because the thing about taking something away from someone isn't just the act itself. It's watching them realize it's never coming back. By early spring, I knew the final notice had been sent. The foreclosure date circled on the calendar in red ink. Not my ink, his. From before all this began. I found it in the pile of mail, the mark still faint, where he'd pressed too hard with the pen. That night, I poured myself a drink, stepped out onto the porch, and looked up at the dark, cloudless sky. This, I said quietly to no one in particular, is the last stretch. When the day came, I didn't drive by to watch. I didn't need to. I'd already pictured it 100 times. The bank officer's clipboard, the movers hauling out furniture, the look on his face when he realized his name meant nothing on a deed anymore. I stayed home, drinking my coffee, while somewhere across town, my absence filled the air heavier than my presence ever could. If you think that was the end, you have no idea what I had planned next. The first snow of January had a way of making the whole street seem quieter than it really was. I could hear my own boots crunch against the driveway as I carried the bags inside, every step sending a dull ache through my knees. From the corner of my eye, I caught the shape of a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. I didn't look twice, not yet. Inside, the heat wrapped around me like a blanket, and the smell of the old wood floors hit me, sharp, familiar, comforting. I set the groceries down on the counter, letting the paper bags lean into each other like tired friends. That's when I saw it. A corner of a manila envelope, half tucked under the kitchen door. No one leaves mail here, not without knocking. I bent down, my back complaining, and picked it up. The paper was cold against my hands. Inside, a single sheet. Typed, no return address. The words were short, but the meaning punched me in the chest. We know you stopped the payment. We'll talk soon. I stood there for a while, just holding it, not thinking, just holding it. They had noticed. Of course they had. You don't pull a string like that without the whole fabric shifting. I set the letter on the counter and poured myself a coffee, even though it was too late in the day. The bitterness kept me anchored, kept my hands steady. The game had changed. And for the first time since Christmas, I felt the smallest flicker of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Control. The car across the street stayed there the next day. Same spot, same angle. Dark windows, Idaho plates. I pretended not to care. I shoveled the walk. I salted the steps. I fixed the loose hinge on the back gate that had squeaked for a year. When I went inside, there was a second envelope. This one under the front mat. You think you're clever. You're not. No name, no number. Cody's style, short. Threats dressed up as facts. I put both letters in a drawer with my tape measure and spare keys. Then I called someone I had not called in a long time. Luis, I said when he answered, you still do the bank jobs? He laughed. Brother, I do everything that pays. You got work? Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just need advice. Luis owns a small company that handles insurance rehabs and bank repos. When people stop paying, the bank calls Luis. He boards windows. He changes locks. He cleans up the mess. He knows the timeline better than any lawyer. We met at a diner by the river. He slid into the booth and set his phone face down. Tell me, he said. I told him everything. The 5 years, the payments, the Christmas, the article, the dinner, the letters. He listened without talking. When I finished, he nodded once. Okay, he said. They're 3 months behind? Maybe 4 now, I said. Notice came 2 weeks ago. 14 days to cure. Right, he said. After that, the bank files. Then a sale date. Could be 60 days, could be 90. Depends on the docket and the judge. But it's coming. He sipped his coffee. You want the house? I looked out the window. The river was a flat line of gray. No, I said. I want my life back. Buying the house might give you that, he said. At the courthouse steps, you can win it cheap if no one shows. Or you can buy the note before the sale if the bank wants it off the books. But that takes cash and timing. I felt the old part of me, the builder, the solver, wake up. How much cash? I asked. Depends on the arrears, he said. Depends on the lender. Sometimes they sell the paper at a discount, 30 cents, 40 cents on the dollar, if they think it's a lost cause. I shook my head. I don't want to crush my son. Luis met my eyes. Then don't crush him, he said. Set terms. Make him grow. Make the terms fair, but yours. We sat in silence for a bit. The waitress refilled our cups. A little boy at the next table tried to blow a straw wrapper into the air and missed, and his mother laughed and kissed his cheek. Luis tapped the table once. Also, he said, get cameras. The kind with cloud backup. Put one facing the street, one on the porch, one at the back gate. I paid the bill and headed to the hardware store. By nightfall, the cameras were up. Tiny red lights blinked in the dark like calm eyes. The car across the street was gone. 2 days later, a white envelope arrived by certified mail. Trustees' sale, notice of default and election to sell. There it was. Date, time, county courthouse. 61 days. I held the paper and felt strange. Not angry, not even sad, just clear. I didn't call Michael. I didn't call Isabella. I called the bank. The man on the phone was polite and stiff. He read from a script. He told me what he was allowed to tell me. Then I asked a question he wasn't ready for. "Are you selling the note?" Silence. Papers shuffled. "I can't discuss investor strategy," he said. "But if an interested party wished to submit an inquiry, that would be handled by our special assets team." He gave me a number. I thanked him and hung up. That night I took Maria's photo down from the mantel and cleaned the glass with a soft cloth. I set it back and lit a candle beside it. "I'm not buying revenge," I said to the empty room. "I'm buying peace." The next morning I called the special assets team. I sent documents. I proved who I was and who I was not. I did not mention my son. I did not mention Christmas. I talked numbers. I talked timelines. Then I called Luis again. "Come look at the house with me," I said. We drove by slow, like any two men checking gutters on a wet day. Lights were on. The big tree in the window was still up, but the top section was dark. The lawn was patchy with ice. The wreath was crooked. Isabella always kept things perfect. Not now. Luis leaned forward, studying the roofline, the downspouts, the fine cracks in the driveway. "She's letting it go," he said. "Or he is." We didn't knock. There was nothing to say that hadn't been said. Back at my place, we ran numbers at my kitchen table, paper spread everywhere, a simple budget, no tricks. What could I pay if I bought the note? What could Michael pay if he grew up? "Make it boring," Luis said. "Boring saves lives." I slept hard for the first time in months. On a Monday, the paper printed a small editor's note. It said the weather on the day in question had not included a winter storm warning. It said the paper regretted the error. No apology, no names. But a correction is a crack in a wall. Water finds it. Truth follows. A week after that, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. "Mr. Flores," a woman said. "This is Patricia Morrison." I looked out the window at the bare maple tree and waited. "I've been reviewing some new information," she said. "Photos, bank statements, social posts, the timeline you mailed to my editor." "I mailed facts," I said. "Do what you like with them." She took a breath. "I owe you a conversation. We don't like to be used. I don't like to be used." "I was used for 5 years," I said. "You get used to it, if you're not careful." Silence. Then, softly, "May I quote you?" "No," I said. "But you can come see the receipts if you want. Bring your notebook. And bring your spine." "Is he here?" She came. She sat at my table. She turned pages. She asked calm questions. Her pen worked steady, neat little letters that looked like a schoolteacher's. When she stood to leave, she said, "You know what this costs." "I do," I said, "and I know what it buys." She nodded once and left. I didn't tell anyone, not Rosa, not Luis, not even the empty house. I went for a walk in the cold and let the air clean my head. 2 days after that, the special assets team called. "We received your interest," the man said. "We'd like to discuss terms." The number he named was lower than I had expected and higher than a miracle. I didn't flinch. "I'll need a partner," I said. Luis didn't let me finish. "I'm in," he said. 50-50. We hold it in an LLC. You manage the note. I manage the headaches." We set up the company that afternoon. We named it Maria's Porch, LLC, because a porch is where you welcome people or ask them to leave. When the wire went out, my hands shook a little. Not from fear, from the weight coming off. The sale date on the courthouse steps stayed on the calendar. But now the lender had a new name. Mine. The knock came one evening just after sunset. I opened the door. Michael stood there alone. He looked different, smaller but clearer, like a photograph that had been too bright and was now corrected. "Dad?" he said. I heard there was a change with the bank. Word travels. Cody would have felt it like a cold wind through an open shirt. "Come in," I said. He did. He looked around like a stranger in a museum. The new paint, the fixed porch light, the small upgrades that weren't fancy but were mine. He sat at the table and folded his hands like a boy in the principal's office. "How bad is it?" he asked. "It's simple," I said. "You pay or you move. I can give you terms, fair ones, but not fake ones." He stared at the wood grain of the table. "Isabella said you were trying to humiliate us." I shook my head. I don't have time for anyone's theater. I slid a paper across to him. 1 page, big numbers, clear lines. "Interest?" he said, looking up. "Lower than the bank," I said, "but real." "Grace period?" 2 weeks, I said, "but real." "And if we miss?" "Then I take the house at the sale," I said. "Clean, fast, no yelling." He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was water there, but it did not fall. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because I'm your father," I said, "not your bank." A father teaches his son how to carry weight. A bank doesn't care if the weight crushes you. He swallowed. "She won't like it." "Then she won't like it," I said. He nodded. He took the paper. He stood. At the door, he turned back. "If we make every payment, every month, on time." "You keep the house," I said, "and you keep your pride." He left. The cold came in for a second, and then the latch clicked and the house was warm again. Payments did not come. January came. Silence. February came. 1 voicemail, not from Michael, from Isabella. It was long and winding and full of pretty words that bent around the only word that mattered: pay. I saved the voicemail and did nothing. 2 weeks later, a car I didn't know rolled up slow and stopped in front of my house. Cody climbed out, alone, no coat, just rage and breath fog. I met him on the porch. He didn't ask to come in. "You think you won," he said. "You think you're some kind of king." "I think I'm done being a fool," I said. His jaw worked. "You buy that paper, and you think you bought a family." "I bought a boundary," I said. He pointed a stiff finger toward my chest. "You will not take my daughters home." "She has a father," I said. "He can pay her note." He laughed, short, mean. "You were always small," he said. "Small town, small mind, small trade, tile and grout and day laborers. You don't belong in rooms where real deals happen." "I like my rooms," I said. He stepped closer. His breath smelled like whiskey and bitterness. "You will back off," he said, "or I will make sure every friend you have finds a reason to forget your name." "I learned to live alone," I said. "I can do it again." He waited for fear. None came. Finally, he shook his head and stalked back to his car. At the curb, he turned. "You know what the shame is?" he said. "You could have had us. You could have had our world. And you chose your own." "I chose my wife's name for my company," I said. "That feels like the right world." He drove off. I watched his taillights go small and then vanish. I went inside and brewed tea, the kind Maria used to like. I held the cup in both hands and let the steam cut through the winter. On a Thursday morning, Patricia's piece ran. Not on page 3. Not in the lifestyle section. Front page, above the fold. The cost of a favor when family becomes the bank. There were no names, there were numbers. There was a timeline close enough to mine to sting and careful enough to keep lawyers asleep. There was a paragraph about pride, and a short line about respect. I didn't clip it. I didn't need to. The phones of the people who needed to read it would ring without my help. That night, Rosa called. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm making soup," I said. "You want some?" She laughed. "We'll be there in 20. We ate at my table. Her husband fixed the back door latch that's still stuck in the humidity. The kids told me about a science project with baking soda volcanoes. There was red sauce on a small chin. I wiped it with a napkin and made a show of being disgusted. and he giggled like bells. When they left, the house was quiet again, but not empty. The sale date came. Cold morning, bright sky, people in coats, paper in hands. A small crowd that looked like all courthouse steps everywhere. Investors, couples, a man who wanted a garage and not a house, a woman in a green scarf holding a folder like it was a shield. Luis stood at my side with his cap pulled low. "Boring," he said. "Boring saves lives." The crier called the first property, then the second, then the third. When he reached the address I knew by heart, my chest went very still. A man I didn't know opened with the minimum. Another bumped it by 1,000. The air felt thin. Luis didn't move. "Wait," he said under his breath. The third bidder shook his head and stepped back. The second hesitated. I raised my hand. Clean number, calm voice. Silence. "Going once," the crier said. "Going twice." "Hold," a voice called. Michael. He was running up the steps, tie crooked, hair wild. He looked like a boy late to class. The crier lifted his clipboard. "We are in process, sir." Michael turned to me, breath showing in short white puffs. "Dad," he said, loud enough for the whole flight of stairs to hear. "I can't do it. I can't keep up. I can't pretend." He swallowed hard. "I signed the release," he said, lifting a paper. His hand shook. "We'll move out in 30 days. I'll take the blame. I'll face her parents. I'll face everyone." The crowd watched the scene the way strangers always do, hungry for a story that isn't theirs. I nodded once. "Then, let's be men." I turned to the crier and gave the number that ended the talk. "Sold," the crier said, "to Maria's Porch, LLC." Louise squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Boring works." We walked down the steps together, Michael between us, thin sky above. He didn't speak until we reached the sidewalk. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "I love you," I said, "and I'm done saving you." He blinked hard. "I need a place for a while," he said. "Just me." I looked at Luis. Luis looked at me. "I've got a duplex on Cedar," I said. "Small, clean, month to month, no cosigner. You'll mow your own strip of grass." He nodded. "I'll take it." "First month and a deposit," I said. He pulled a folded envelope from his coat and handed it to me. "Cash," he said. "Earned, not borrowed." I put it in my pocket without looking. "Keys at 5, I said. "I'll show you how the heater likes to be spoken to." He laughed once, raw and true, and then turned away, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run down beaches with knees like brown marbles and hair like a storm. The house on Kendall Yard stood empty for 8 weeks. Luis's crew came and did what crews do. Paint, patching, a deep clean that felt like a prayer. I kept nothing, not a fork, not a curtain, not a scrap. Then I hung a small plaque in the entry. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet line. "Maria's Porch. Be kind in this house." On a Saturday, a young couple came to see it. The woman touched the doorway like it was a friend. The man checked the crawl space and nodded, serious, relieved. They had a baby who stared up at the light like it was a new idea. They had a budget that was tight but honest. We signed papers by the window. I watched the baby sleep in a car seat on the floor while ink dried. When it was done, the woman said, "We didn't think we would ever get a house." "You showed up ready," I said. "Ready counts." They hugged me. I stood there stiff for a second and then let myself hug back. As I walked to my truck, the man called out, "Thank you, Mr. Flores." I waved once. "Be kind in that house," I said. "That's the only rule." A month later, my doorbell rang. Michael stood there with a box in his hands. "I brought your tools back," he said, "the ones I borrowed and forgot to return." He handed me the box. Inside was everything. The level with my initials burned into the handle, the old chalk line that still smelled like dust, the mallet with the tape-wrapped grip. "Come in," I said. We sat at the table. He told me he had moved out, that he was cooking for himself, that he burned rice twice, and then learned a trick. He told me he was seeing a counselor every Thursday. He told me he had blocked numbers that needed blocking. He told me he walked to work now. He said the cold helped. After a while, he reached into his coat and pulled out another envelope. He pushed it across the table. "For the duplex," he said. "On time." "Good," I said, and put it in the drawer without counting. "Let's eat." I made rice. I didn't burn it. He washed the dishes. When he dried the last plate, he stood there for a long second, staring at the clean counter, like he had never seen one. "Dad," he said without looking up, "I want to earn Sundays back." "Okay," I said. "Start this Sunday. Noon. You bring dessert. Something cheap and good." He smiled small. "Peach cobbler from the store." I nodded. "Perfect." He went to the door and put on his coat. At the threshold he turned. "Do you ever miss her?" he asked. He meant his mother. He meant Maria. He meant the woman who taught us both how to love what we had. "Every day," I said. "But some days it feels like missing is a way of holding." He nodded like he was putting that sentence in a safe place in his mind. "See you Sunday," he said. "See you Sunday," I said. Spring came. The maple budded. The porch light stayed steady. I planted rosemary by the steps because Maria liked the way it made your hands smell like you had done something right. One afternoon I drove past Kendall Yards and saw the young couple on the porch. They were laughing about something small. The baby was bigger now and banging a plastic spoon on the rail like a drum. "Be kind in this house," the little plaque said. They looked like they were trying. At home, a new letter waited in my mailbox. No Idaho plates on the street, no shadow at the corner. The envelope was white, with neat writing I knew as well as my own. From Michael. Inside was a single page. "Dad," it said, "I can cover next month on my own. I got the promotion. It's not huge, but it's clean. Thank you for letting the ground hurt my feet. It taught me where to stand. M." I read it twice. Then I set it under the magnet on the fridge where I used to keep school art and soccer schedules and drawings of houses with giant suns. I made coffee. I opened the back door and let the air in. The house smelled like soap and rosemary and heat. In the evening, I sat on the steps with a blanket over my knees. The sky went pink like it always does before it gives up and goes blue-black. A woman walked her dog past and waved. A neighbor across the street fiddled with his grill and cursed when a flame licked his knuckles, then laughed at himself and kept going. I didn't think about the newspaper. I didn't think about Cody. I didn't think about the nights I ate peanut butter and counted the days until someone else's mortgage payment took my last dollar. I thought about Sunday. I thought about peach cobbler that tasted like a start. I thought about how a porch is a kind of promise. This is a place you can come back to if you're willing to knock. When the porch light clicked on, I didn't feel like a king. I felt like a man who had learned the difference between saving someone and letting them stand. Inside, on the mantel, the candle next to Maria's photo burned slow and steady. I whispered good night, and it felt like she heard me. And for the first time in a long time, I could hear myself too. The silence in the room stretched long enough for the clock on the mantel to tick 5 times. My son's smirk had faded, replaced by the smallest twitch in his jaw. He knew. He just didn't want to believe it. "You stopped the mortgage?" he finally said, voice thin. I leaned forward in my chair. "No, son. I paid the mortgage. Paid it in full. Last month. You just didn't notice. Because I had the deed moved into a trust, one that doesn't have your name anywhere near it." His eyes flicked to the envelope I'd left on the coffee table. Thick, official, sealed in a way that dared him to open it. What's in there?" "The proof," I said, "and the terms." He hesitated, then tore it open. His lips moved as he read, the color draining from his face. You transferred the house to the foundation." I nodded. "The Harper Community Trust. The same one you've been ignoring for years while chasing bigger things. This house will never be sold. Not by you. Not by anyone." He tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. "Oh, and about that loan you took out against the property without asking me. The bank's already been paid. In cash. You'll be getting a visit from them soon, though. Not for money. For answers." The room went still except for the fire popping in the grate. I stood, walked past him, and paused at the doorway. "You wanted me gone for Christmas," I said quietly. "Now it's you who won't be coming back." I stepped outside into the crisp night air. Through the window, I saw him standing there, shoulders slumped, still holding the papers. The same house that was supposed to be his ticket to a bigger life was now the one place he could never touch. And for the first time in years, I felt the kind of peace that comes when you take back everything they thought they'd stolen. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching to the end.